I said at the very end of last night's show that we've got a little bit of a scoop to share with you tonight. This is that scoop. In-house on our staff, we have been talking about this as an inside, kind of an inside-out story. Not your typical news story, not your typical scoop, but I think it's important. It is one of the few times we have ever had a scoop on this show where I feel like I need to send this up like a flare for other news organizations in particular. That's part of what I'm intending to do here with this story tonight. But okay, here it goes. We have this thing we have been doing on our show for a while now that's called www.sendittorachel.com. Basically, the idea is that if you want to get in touch with us, if you want to give us a tip or send us a document, you can do so via that website, www.sendittorachel.com. We get tons of stuff that way. We get information about important local political fights that otherwise aren't getting national coverage. We get a lot of information about bad behavior by elected officials. We occasionally get news about really good behavior by elected officials that has gone unnoticed. We get anonymous tips. And we get documents, too. We get a lot of documents. We've had a lot of firsthand records come across the transom through www.sendittorachel.com, documents that show us how the government is making decisions, what the government's doing, whether or not they are talking about it publicly yet. So it's been a great resource for our reporting. I will say it one more time, www.sendittorachel.com. It's still up and running. We'd love to hear from you. Well, a few weeks ago, we got a new document through that channel. And at first glance, it was just unbelievably red hot. I mean, if by any chance this document is real, it is so sensitive, so classified, that I cannot show it to you. I cannot show it to almost anyone. Because of its purported classification level, it's actually very hard to circulate it at all or even to describe it to people. And I don't say that to try to hype it. I say that to let you know that it's actually logistically difficult to validate something like this. Because when it's classified at that level or appears to be classified at that level, you can't run a document like that by people the way you would for any other kind of document we might get shipped to us from some source. People who are in a position to recognize or authenticate this kind of document, people who have worked with things at this level of classification, they typically will refuse to even look at a document like this if there's any chance that it is real, that it is real classified information that has been improperly disclosed. That's because the terms of their own security clearance mean effectively that they can't review something like this without it creating legal obligations on them. So it's very hard to check this stuff out. Classification-wise, it is logistically just very difficult to deal with, very, very sensitive. But in terms of the political implications of this document that we are given, its content, politically, this thing is so sensitive, it takes all the air out of the room and all of the nearby rooms as well. People talk about finding the smoking gun. What got sent to us was not just a smoking gun, it was a gun still firing proverbial bullets. So here's the deal. We believe now that the real story we have stumbled upon here is that somebody out there is shopping carefully forged documents to try to discredit news agencies reporting on the Russian attack on our election, and specifically on the possibility that the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russians in mounting that attack. Let me show you what I mean. Here's what we know. Do you remember a month ago when a relatively new news organization called The Intercept published this report? Top secret NSA report details Russian hacking effort days before 2016 election. This was published by The Intercept almost exactly a month ago, Monday, June 5th. Now, The Intercept has a bunch of very good reporters working there, a lot of aggressive national security reporters who've really earned their stripes. In terms of the Russia story, The Intercept they've really stood out for being basically aggressively skeptical on that story. Skeptical that there was a Russian attack on our election, skeptical of the possibility that the Trump campaign might have colluded in that Russian attack. I mean, there is nothing wrong with a news organization having an editorial take on a particular story. I am not criticizing them for their take on Russia. But for the purposes of understanding what we just figured out, it's important to understand that The Intercept does, as a news organization, have a take on the Russia attack, on the Russia story. And their their take on it is that they're dismissive of the story. And that's why it was really surprising and really interesting that it was The Intercept, of all places, that published this big advance in the Russia story. New details on the Russian hacking effort into the U.S. presidential election, including a U.S. intelligence report which said that the attack went on for longer than had been previously disclosed. It was wider than previously disclosed, and they got further in their attack than had been previously disclosed. Quoting from The Intercept, Russian military intelligence executed a cyber attack on at least one U.S. voting software supplier and sent spear phishing emails to more than 100 local election officials just days before last November's presidential election. Quote, Russian government hackers were part of a team with a cyber espionage mandate specifically directed at U.S. and foreign elections. They focused on parts of the U.S. election system directly connected to the voter registration process. Quote, Russian hacking may have penetrated further into U.S. voting systems than was previously understood. Russian hacking may have breached at least some elements of the U.S. voting system. And all this explosive stuff is cited to, quote, a highly classified intelligence report obtained by The Intercept. In addition to their write-up of it, this is important, The Intercept, they didn't just publish an article about that top secret intelligence report, they actually published the top secret intelligence report. They published the top secret NSA report they said they obtained, 5 pages of it, detailing this American intelligence understanding of how Russian agents attempted to wriggle their way into the U.S. election system further than we'd ever known before. The document came with a flow chart of how the Russians got in and why they targeted the places they did. It's very detailed. And the whole thing, as I mentioned, was labeled top secret on every page. The Intercept reported when they published this thing that U.S. intelligence officials wouldn't comment on the document, but they said agencies did ask them for certain redactions, some of which The Intercept agreed to make. So they made those redactions, specific redactions at the request of U.S. agencies, and then they hit publish on that story. Big deal, right? I mean, new detailed evidence into American intelligence gathering on Russian attempts to get inside our election system. This was a very big story, based, again, on a very classified document. Huge story, a real scoop, a real coup for The Intercept. But now, even just a month later, that Intercept story is remembered less, I think, for the content of the story, and more for what happened immediately after they published it. Because immediately after they published it, we learned that there was an arrest. We got our first heads up about that Intercept story just before 4 p.m. on June 5th. An hour later, at 5 p.m. sharp, June 5th, the Justice Department announced they had already had in custody, they had already arrested the person who allegedly leaked that top secret document to The Intercept. And this is a pending federal case now against that NSA contractor. It's not resolved at all, but from the criminal complaint the government filed here, the case is not at all subtle. Apparently the NSA can tell how many people have ever accessed, have ever looked at an individual secret document like this. They can tell who they are by name. And in the criminal complaint, the FBI agent named in the complaint lays out how the FBI investigation into this leak proceeded. They have this list of like a half dozen people who they know have accessed this document. They go down that list looking for someone who's accessed the document, who also appears to have been in touch with this news organization, with The Intercept. By that process, they quickly narrow it down to one NSA contractor working in the state of Georgia, a contractor named Reality Lee Winner. According to the FBI, she was the only one of those 6 who had both accessed the document and been in touch with The Intercept. Then they go down a second line of approach. The agent says in this criminal complaint that there's a crease. Like you get a crease from folding something? There's a crease that is visually evident on the document itself. That was a clue to the FBI that whoever took this document off the NSA had printed it, had printed the page and folded it and carried it out of the NSA office by hand. And then there was another clue, and this is where the story gets a little bit crazy. Most color printers, maybe even all of them, I don't know, they apparently leave behind, when they print, right, when they print out a piece of paper from a computer, right, when they print, they leave behind a fingerprint on every sheet that they print out. You know how in old school detective stories, they do forensic analysis of the quirks of individual typewriters, right? To find out which typewriter typed the ransom note or whatever. There is a version of that for computer printers too. And that may have come a-calling when The Intercept showed the NSA this document they had obtained through a source because they wanted the NSA to validate it, to comment on whether or not this document they had received was real. In that document, which we have access to because they published it online when they published their story, in that document, alongside all the plainly visible text and the flowchart and even the redactions and everything, alongside all that obvious stuff, was also this barely visible fingerprint from the printer it was printed on. The fingerprint is basically a series of light, almost invisible, yellow printed dots. And unless you were looking for them, you would never notice them just by reading the document. But if you run the page through like an image software and do a little magic reversing the colors, and in this case, a little brightening so you can see them on your TV, up pops, if you're looking for it, a readable, specific grid of these little dots. And that grid of those little dots is basically a fingerprint, and it tells you which exact printer was used to print out that page. Tells you the model number, tells you the serial number, and it tells you exactly which time and date that printing happened. Now, it may be that the FBI didn't have to use those little yellow printer dots to track down their suspect. The FBI doesn't mention the printer dots in their charging document in this case. But once The Intercept published this document online, for people who understand forensic tracking of documents and the dangers of leaking documents, those little yellow dots were an obvious thing to worry about because they were there on that document that The Intercept published. They were there to be read by a trained observer on that document that The Intercept published online. Okay, so now let me show you how this worked for us. This is the NSA document published by The Intercept. You see the little dots? You can see the little dots in that very specific pattern in relation to that little piece of the text that we've excerpted there. That's uncovered on one of the pages that The Intercept published. Now watch. I'm going to show you that same pattern of dots, except this time it's from a different document. Okay? As you can see, it's the same pattern of dots, the top half of the pattern. But what I'm showing you here, this is not the document published by The Intercept. This is from the document that somebody sent us through www.sendittorachel.com. That same pattern of dots, the upper portion of it, exactly, appeared on the supposed NSA document that somebody sent to us anonymously. So again, you see it here in the Intercept document with the dots by the word summary. Those same dots, the top part of the pattern, appear, magic, by the word summary in the document that we got. It's not all of the dots. It's just the ones that appear to have slipped through in a photocopy cut and paste job. This is what it appears to be to us, a cut and paste forgery using The Intercept's NSA document as a template. And again, here, see that thin line there on the upper left-hand corner? You can see what I think is the crease where the FBI says the Intercept document was folded after it was printed. We think we see remnants of that exact same crease on the forged, supposed top secret NSA document that got sent to us. Now, it may be helpful to know we got this purported NSA document the same week the Intercept published theirs. And here's another thing I can show you in terms of sussing that out. Look at the metadata here. Check this out in terms of the timing. The suspect in the Intercept leak goes to jail on Saturday, gets arrested on Saturday, June 3rd. Saturday, June 3rd, the FBI interviews and arrests Reality Winner, this NSA contractor. She has pleaded not guilty, but she has been in jail since Saturday, June 3rd. The Intercept published their story 2 days later, around 4 p.m., that Monday, June 5th. The forged document that we got sent to us appears to have been created in that narrow window of time between those two events, after Reality Winner got arrested and before The Intercept published the document, with its identifiable printer dots and the crease in the paper that appear to have been lifted off that same document that The Intercept published. Our document appears to be a cut and paste forgery derived from The Intercept's document. We cannot know for sure, but if that is the case, then whoever did that work to create this forgery was cutting and pasting together a fake document working from a document that was not yet publicly available. They would have started creating that file, or they would have started that file after Reality Winner's arrest and before The Intercept published it to everyone, and then sent it to us 2 days later. Given what we know about the time it was sent to us and what we can see from the metadata, we believe this is the timeline. Now, is the timeline a clue as to who contacted us and sent us this document? We don't know. Maybe the metadata itself has been faked or is wrong in some way. I don't know. There are other things that are wrong in the document too that raised red flags for us, but they're subtle. There are some little typos. There's some weird spacing that just doesn't look right. It has a date on it in terms of when in the future it can be declassified. That doesn't really make much sense if it was produced when they said it was produced. The big red flag for us is that the document we were given, this is part of what made it seem so red hot, it names an American citizen. The document we were sent, which we believe to be a forgery, names a specific person in the Trump campaign as working with the Russians on their hacking attack on the election last year. And the specific name of the Trump campaign person is irrelevant, and I am not sharing it now because we believe from how the NSA works, from multiple conversations with current and former officials familiar with documents of this type, we believe that a U.S. citizen's name would never appear in a document like this. Even if the typos and the weird spacing and the other odd stuff had snuck through for some reason, an American citizen's name would not have snuck through, not at this level of an NSA report. That our document contains an American name spelled out, that says to experienced people who've worked with this stuff that what we got is forged. It's fake. Which is interesting if you work on this show. This is news because why is someone shopping a forged document of this kind to news organizations covering the Trump-Russia affair? Last week, 3 journalists resigned from their jobs at CNN after that network retracted a story they had written about the Trump administration related to the Trump-Russia affair. CNN says the sourcing of that story, in retrospect, did not meet its editorial standards. Also last week, Vice retracted 2 stories about the Trump administration. Like CNN, Vice also cited problems with the sourcing of those stories. The thing that's knocking around in the back of your mind right now is from 2004, when the legendary Dan Rather lost his career at CBS over a story for the Evening News that delved into George W. Bush's truncated service in the National Guard during Vietnam. The Rather team had documents that they got from a source that they checked out, but the sourcing of those documents was later attacked and undermined. CBS was ripped to shreds over the process it went through that resulted in those documents being put on the air as the basis for that story. Still, over a decade later, the origin of those documents is murky. But undeniably, CBS running that story was a disaster for 2 things. It was a disaster for everyone involved, and it was a disaster for a news story. Right? That was, in personal terms, that was the end of a trusted voice of reason and insight and perspective, Dan Rather, as a regular presence in the family living room. In terms of the news, that was a spike through the heart of the story of George W. Bush's National Guard service keeping him out of Vietnam, which was a true and interesting story, and which really might have been a serious ongoing political liability for candidate George W. Bush. But nobody was ever willing to touch it again during that campaign because of the way those documents purporting to prove out the worst aspects of that story blew up like a pipe bomb at CBS News. And so, heads up, everybody. This is what I mean by an inside-out scoop. Somebody, for some reason, appears to be shopping a fairly convincing fake NSA document that purports to directly implicate somebody from the Trump campaign in working with the Russians on their attack on the election. It is a forgery. Let me caveat that. It is either a forgery or every single national security official we consulted about this story is wrong about it. I don't know if the Trump campaign worked with Russia or not. If they did knowingly work with a foreign government, a foreign military intelligence service, to attack our election to help Trump to the presidency, that is clearly the biggest political scandal in modern American history by a mile. We don't know if it happened or not, though. We don't know yet whether it happened or not. Not yet. The special counsel is investigating. Congressional committees are more or less investigating. And the American news media is investigating. Whether or not the Trump campaign did it, one way to stab in the heart aggressive American reporting on that subject is to lay traps for American journalists who are reporting on it. Trick news organizations into reporting what appears to be evidence of what happened, and then after the fact, blow that reporting up. You then hurt the credibility of that news organization. You also cast a shadow over any similar reporting in the future, whether or not it's true, right? Even if it's true, you plant a permanent question, a permanent asterisk, a permanent who knows, as to whether that too might be false, like that other story, whether that too might be based on faked evidence. So heads up, everybody. Part of the defense against this Trump-Russia story now we can report includes somebody apparently forging at least one classified NSA report and shopping it to news organizations as if it's real. We don't know who's doing it, but we're working on it. Heads up in the meantime, everybody. We will be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.